Doesn't have the rock in it though, does it?
Well, obviously the times change. And what you need now is a large, muscular man covered in baby oil.
Hello and welcome to the AVForums podcast for the 18th of June 2014. I'm Phil Hinton, and joining me on this edition are Assistant Editor Steve Withers,
A naked American man stole my balloons.
Games Editor Mark Botwright,
Nurse.
Movies Editor Simon Crust,
Have you ever talked to a corpse?
and Audio Reviewer Ed Selley.
You have very beautiful sheep.
So we're going to get straight into... What did you just say?
I've never seen it.
Thank
I
you
don't know
very
if that's. I don't know if that's an important line or not. I just liked it.
Right. So we're going to get straight into things with a review, because we very rarely plummet the depths, Steve.
Yeah.
But this is the first subwoofer review
Excellent
that
segue there.
we've had for a while. The SVS SB2000. Tell us all about it.
Yeah, the SVS SB2000. So last year, I think it was last year, they had the SB1000 and the PB1000. The S in the SB stands for sealed, obviously, and the P in the PB stands for ported. And I think I reviewed the SB. Did you do one as well? Did you do the Ultra or something? I think maybe.
Yeah, I did one the size of a fridge. The SB13.
Yeah, you did a really big one. But the SB1000 and the PB1000 were slightly more affordable in terms of their price point. This year they brought out the SB2000 and the PB2000, and there's a couple of big differences. One of which they've got a 500 watts sledge amplifier built in. There's been some other tweaks in there as well, and it has a curved metal grille on the front. Gotta say,
Oh, not another curve.
yeah, I'm a bit Marmite about this one, because I kind of like my grills to be, cloth. I'm old school, cloth grills. This is metal. Obviously, if you've got small children or pets, it's probably quite handy because they can't go and poke their finger into the.
Or you sit in
driver.
your lounge playing about with an air pistol. That
Yes.
might be quite.
Yeah, it might be praised for that, because it could be used as a bulletproof shield. It is quite thick metal. Wasn't sold on it myself, and actually listened to it mostly with it off, with the grill off, because I just felt like it was too much, and it kind of would slightly put me off. In terms of performance, I thought it was fantastic, but on a purely aesthetic, cosmetic approach, I thought it was a bit much, this sort of curved metal grill. Some might love it, of course. It's just my personal preference. I would have preferred a more traditional cloth grill like they had on the previous generation on the 1000s. But anyway, as it's a sealed sub, it's relatively small, nice small footprint, which is always handy. I don't think wives are always too keen when people bring in subwoofers the size of a fridge. I thought it was a fantastic performer. Given its size, it can go really low. It's got a hell of a kick to it. It was nice and tight, controlled. It seemed quite responsive. It worked very well with movies, but it also worked with music, which is not always the case. I know Ed could talk at length about his feelings towards using subwoofers when you listen to music, but people do. And if you do, I don't personally, I'd rather use just two floor standing stereo speakers. But if you do like using a sub with your music listening, I think it's good for that too. It's 649 quid, so it's not massively expensive. There is a bit more, but last year's were definitely cheaper, but I think there is more in this year's models, so that's why it's a bit more expensive. But in terms of performance, price, and size, dimensions, all very good. Not massive, not completely sold on the curved metal grill. Some might like it, some maybe won't. But all in all, though, it is a really good subwoofer, and I gotta highly recommend it.
So it uses a sledge amplifier. I take it really hammers home the bass.
I think I actually used Sledgehammer as the tagline on that review. How original of me. It's. Yeah, I think SVS subs are great. I've actually got an SVS sub myself, and I think they. Sorry.
As do I.
There you go. Excellent. And I think they're really good subs. They make really quality subs that perform superbly and at a reasonable price, which is always a nice thing to have. So if you're looking for a sub that's relatively small, you can go for the sealed SB2000. If you've got more space and you want something with a little bit more kick, then you could go for the much larger PB2000, which is the ported one. And I haven't actually reviewed that yet. I've got a PB1000, and I can vouch for the size of them, the weight of the damn things. But hopefully we'll get one in for review soon, and we can have a look at that as well.
Sorry, Steve, you might have said it, and it might have just slipped right over my head. But what was the size of the driver in this?
12-inch. I didn't say it. It's 12 inches, which is bigger than last year. I think last year's was 10. So it's a bigger driver, more amplification.
So an extra 2 inches, a nice 12-incher.
A big solid 12-incher, yeah. They can get down to some real depths. I wish I put that in the review now.
It can plumb the depths, can it?
Plumb some serious depth, yeah.
Right, so SB stands for sealed, PV stands for ported. Now, this causes lots of arguments on the forums. Lots of arguments saying you must go with a sealed subwoofer, don't go with a ported subwoofer. Pluses and negatives for both designs, but quickly, let's just have a quick 101 session here. What are the differences between a sealed and ported sub?
The main one is that one of them's got a big hole in and one of them doesn't. But on a more fundamental level, if you pierce the actual box that a subwoofer's in, so air is able to sort of, if you like, move in and out of it, you are augmenting the amount of air that the driver is moving, and you can generally get a little bit more bang for your buck, and it normally improves the sensitivity of both a normal loudspeaker and indeed a subwoofer as well. The downside is that ports they bring behavioural traits all of their own. If you push a lot of air, well, if you listen to the wind whistle through the eaves of your house, you'll know that air is not silent. And indeed, if you push a lot of air through a bass port, it starts to join in and become part of the audio performance of the product, which is less than desirable. And if it's leaving the product at a reasonable speed, if it's quite close to a wall, it's got to go somewhere, and that tends to cause booming and resonance as well. This does mean there is certainly something to the argument that very, very good subwoofers are more often than not immensely powerful sealed boxes. The only device that's actually producing any low end actual resonant energy is the driver. And yeah, I mean the SB13 that I reviewed, that was a sealed unit, and it had no difficulty going preposterously low, but obviously, as I say, a 13-inch driver with a substantial piece of casework around it. I mean, it was bloody enormous. It basically was the same height as the arm on a sofa, so serious piece of sort of equipment. Now, Steve has alluded to the fact I don't like subs with music. I'm somewhat judgmental about this. But effectively, if you are going to do it, there is a lot to be said for sealed designs, because they will generally behave themselves rather better than something which is sort of venting out of more than one place. In the same way that if you have subwoofers with more than one driver in them, be it two actives, one active and one passive radiator, that's still effectively that's more in the way of radiating area to slow down, to get confused, to not keep up with the smaller drivers in your loudspeakers, and to give that sort of wallowy effect. So if you're looking for a subwoofer for music, I do advocate sealed box single driver subwoofers. But by the same token, if you want something for explosions, you probably want to look to you get more bang for your buck out of a ported subwoofer. I mean, I habitually use the Tannoy TS212 with two 12-inch drivers, one active, one passive radiator. Now, I turn that off for music because it moves very, very slowly and somewhat out of sync with everything else. But it's hugely entertaining for films. So it's kind of horses for courses and what you want, basically.
Yeah, I'd go along with that. I use the PB1000 for watching movies, but just use two stereo floor standards for listening to music.
Well, you see, when I listen to music, I have all four subs on. Because
blimey.
it's
4 subs in your...
Well, it's to balance out the room. So
yeah, I know.
You know what I mean? And
it
doesn't mean that it's any louder than having one single sub in there, because there's very, very small incremental rises in volume level. It's more...
I know, you're making a very valid point there. It's far better to run a large subwoofer well within its design tolerances than to take a smaller one and razz it. That's when, if it is ported, then it's going to make a huge amount of noise.
Yeah, and running 4 subwoofers as well, you start to take room issues out of the equation as well, because you can balance the sound out, so the listening position's getting the the best quality of bass, not necessarily the most amount, the best quality of bass, and that has to be musical as well. And fortunately, the subwoofers I'm using are pretty musical, so I don't have any issues using them to fill in the bottom end when I'm listening to music. And sometimes it's just a little bit of breath, and it can make all the difference. And you don't realise it's a sub adding that. You take the subs out, and suddenly that bit of breath, if it's a female vocalist or whatever, it's gone.
The neat floor standards that I use in my 2-channel system, I mean, they are 28 hertz at plus minus 3 dB, so they go pretty low without any assistance. I mean, they've got an isobaric sort of bass array in the bottom of them. So, in other words, a subwoofer to actually augment them needs to be huge and really beautifully engineered. So in many ways I am setting a really tricky benchmark, whereas I dare say if you've got stand mounts or smaller loudspeakers...
Yeah, I'm talking about normal people, Ed. You know what I mean?
Well, to be fair, the speakers I've got, they're not particularly large. They just hit tremendously hard. I
think maybe I'm wrong on this, and maybe people will add their comments underneath this podcast, but I would hazard a guess that the vast majority of AVForums members are going to have subsat setups. Just because I would imagine, and again, if I'm wrong, people can correct me, that at least 70 or 80% of those people, the system is in their living room. Very few people have a dedicated room, or lucky enough to have a dedicated room. So it has to fit in with daily life as well, and subsat systems are infinitely easier to integrate that way, and add in the subwoofer. And then the subwoofer really has a job to do then.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That is the exception, I suppose. If you've got a subsat system, then you obviously need to use a sub.
Oh, of course.
I did say that I was using 2 floor standards for listening to music, so I think that's slightly different.
I would also say one other... Again, there's always exceptions that disprove the rule, but I would also say that downward firing subs are essentially, because the driver is working in a different plane to the drivers in your main speakers, that's normally going to be a bit of a no-no. That's not going to help you for music. Modern AV amplifiers can do phase correction for that. But ultimately, if you've got slightly different arrays for drivers, that's not going to help you along. A forward firing or side firing design, I would always think is an advantage there as well.
As we can see, it's a thorny subject. It's one which causes lots of great conversation and debate on the forum. So if you haven't checked out the Subwoofer forum, definitely go there and check it out, and find out what the latest things are that people are talking about. But it is one of these subjects that once you get into it, as we've just alluded to with our short conversation there, once you start talking about sealed, ported, subsat systems, adding a sub in with music, adding more than one sub, it can get pretty complicated pretty quickly. And another thing that I've certainly noticed in my experience over last 12 years of AV forums is that everybody's got an opinion when it comes to subwoofers, and it's definitely one area where there are a lot of arguments, guys, about fairly trivial things, because people have different theories and different beliefs in the way that they integrate a subwoofer into a system.
Yeah, I mean, I always had fun and games. I mean, when I did run 2 subs downstairs, it became abundantly clear there was only one really cracking place to place a subwoofer, which meant that the second subwoofer had to be inverted and placed on top of the first one, separated by 4 golf ball sized lumps of blue tack, which wasn't the most aesthetically pleasing effect that there's ever been.
I thought for a second you were going to say inverted and hanging from the ceiling.
No, it was just placed on top of the other one. It was tremendously effective, but
I've got to say the best multiple sub setup I have ever experienced is it's a video that's on the forums. If you go and search it out, it's called the Bat Barn. It was an AV Forums members build, and it was so long ago that I've actually forgotten who it was that had the build, and I really apologise for forgetting your name. But I'm just thinking of this on the spot. But he basically used his cinema was in a barn, so upstairs was the cinema room, and downstairs was basically a subwoofer with 2 holes cut in the floor at the front of the room, and I think there was 4 drivers. But it was phenomenal, because basically what he was doing was using the downstairs area of this barn as basically sub-enclosure, with the 2 holes feeding the bass up into the cinema room. And I have to say, it was absolutely phenomenal, the response with music and movies. Superb. So there's all sorts of crazy things when it comes to bass, and I don't know what it is, Ed, but bass seems to drive the movie experience. That seems to be the thing that gets the adrenaline running.
Separates the sort of basic experience from something which is visceral, something which is far more believable. I'm slightly distracted because I finally found, in reference to what you were saying, Phil, I finally found my favourite subwoofer install, which I shall put into the chat box now, called the Royal Device. And it uses it's a horn loaded device built into the floor of a listening room. So it actually runs on comparatively low levels of power, but I think it's good for sort of 16 hertz at plus minus 3 dB. It's just absolutely phenomenal, and it's just been assembled into the floor of the room. Just as you can see it, if you look down the photo chart, I think it's got 8 15-inch Fostex sort of horn loaded bastard drivers in it. So that's a rich toy for lunatics right there. I mean, it periodically crops up on the forums, gets linked to every 6 months or so ever since I've been joining.
Well, as soon as you were talking there, I went away and found out exactly what was what with this subsystem. So it was Mark Goldie's room that we visited. So sorry, Mark, I didn't remember your name there, but it was October 2008 that we came to visit and shoot that video. So it was a long time ago, and I don't know if you still got this room and it's still running. But basically, the system he's using, Ed, it's what's called an infinite baffle subwoofer. Yeah. So basically,
although, to be fair, that's infinite baffle is in many ways it's a posh term for a sealed box. But from what you've explained there, from what he's doing, yeah, the baffle itself is, well, there's a, put it like this, it's less important that it's not ported when you've got that amount of space to move air around in, and then you can channel it and move it to your requirements. So yeah, that's serious low end.
Yeah, and I've got to say, I've only ever seen it done once, and it was in Mark's system. So I don't know if anybody else has ever done this. Certainly in the UK, I know there's a few people done it in the States, but then in the States, they've got the room to do that, haven't they? They can take a whole room and dedicate it to 4 drivers.
And comparatively easy to modify house structures.
Yes.
I mean, let's face it, if you've got a solid brick sort of structure, as is common in the UK, that becomes, it's a fair old engineering exercise to start hacking that about and putting a subwoofer channel into it.
Okay, so that's subwoofers. That was Steve's review of the SVS, as well as a quick 101 on sealed versus ported. And if you got any questions, then add them to the thread underneath the podcast, or you can email podcast@avforums.com, or send us a message or a question on Twitter @avforums. And that's where we're going to go next, because we've only had one Ask the Edits question this week, but it is directed at Steve, who's a TV reviewer. And this comes from Riz, and Riz is basically saying, why are reviewers keeping silent about the lack of BT 2020 support in all UHD TVs on the market? I think what Riz is trying to get at is that we don't mention and we don't measure for BT 2020, but there's a good reason for that, Steve.
Yeah, there's a good reason for that. No one uses it. It's not part of the standards, and I've never seen a TV that gets anywhere near it. BT 2020 is massive. It's bigger than DCI, which is the spec that's used for cinemas. I can't, in all honesty, see any standard they agree on for 4K, ultimate standard being agreed, that uses Rec 2020 as a standard.
It can't, just because of the bit depth it would be required.
Yeah, it's just not feasible.
Yep. So that hopefully answers your question, Riz. There's
basically no point having a go at a TV for not hitting that when I never even expected it to in the first place.
No, and there's no material that's mastered in that.
Not even at cinema.
Certainly in the professional sphere, there's no editing systems that work in that realm either. And in post-production, I'm unaware of anything that runs Rec 2020. So that's why it's never mentioned, because it's not.
We have actually mentioned it in a couple of reviews. I did definitely measure against Rec 2020 on one of the OLED reviews. I think it was the first one. I think it was the Samsung, but out of curiosity, because that had a much wider color space. But even that, and that could get almost almost DCI, but it's still nowhere near Rec 2020.
And I bet you somebody shot pornography in Rec 2020.
Yeah, I got it.
When it comes down to it, it doesn't matter what the standard is, or how obscure, how bizarre, or how pointless it is. The one medium that
there's nothing I know, Ed, that even works in that standard yet. So, and for anybody that doesn't know what Rec 2020 is, basically that is the color space. So how wide the color is in a picture. So what we're talking about here is more color information being added to the picture, but what we're talking about is a huge amount of color information being added with Rec 2020.
Twice the size of Rec 709, which is our current standard.
But you see, I think that confuses people when you say twice the size. I think twice the amount.
Yeah, twice the amount. Well, particularly, and to be honest, it's mostly because it's the biggest part of the visual spectrum. Is mostly within green, isn't it, Phil?
Yeah, and obviously that adds other things like brightness issues and so on as well. Because if you're working in the green and yellow sphere, that's where you need more energy, because that's where your brightness comes from. So
I mean, I'd be happy if they chose DCI as a standard, and that was the standard for some sort of future format, because that would just tie it in then with cinema specs. Because I'm talking to the guys at Deluxe when I was there a couple of weeks ago. They seem to give me the impression that the ultimate, there's a definite convergence of home cinema and cinema. And to a certain extent, we're almost there as it is. In terms of we can watch 2K and 4K at home, 1080p, and 4K is effectively the same thing as a cinema. And it's only really now, if you talk about sort of the bit rates and the color spaces, if we can increase those in terms of the home cinema, then we can really start to get to a point where you can watch stuff at home that is identical to what you're seeing at the cinema. So
the problem is, though, is that the most likely delivery system for 4K, Steve, is going to be streaming.
Yep. It
and,
is.
And as soon as you add wider color space, more bit depth, you're adding more data.
Yeah.
And you're going to need bigger and bigger pipes to take the content.
Unfortunately, that is true. Although, the funny thing is that technology moves very fast. So, they were telling me about the original DCI specs, and they had within the specifications, there's various codings, and one of them was for a number of hard drives being used to store the movies when they were being shipped out to the cinemas. And of course, they'd never ever used more than one, because by the time they got around to sort of mass, pushing DCI out into the mass market, as it were, hard drive, storage capacity had increased so much that they could stick it all on one drive easily. So, things do change. You never know. But at the moment, yes, it's looking very much like, because of the way that 4K will be delivered, we're going to end up with, basically what we've already got, but with just more resolution.
Right, okay, let's wrap up on hardware for this week. So, upcoming reviews, Steve, we have coming.
We've got the Samsung M5 multi-room speakers. Mark's already reviewed the M7s. These are the slightly smaller, cheaper versions. But I've got to say, Samsung's multi-room solution is very good. I'm really impressed with it. It's quicker and easier to set up, in fact, even than Sonos, which is obviously the name that most people are familiar with. But it's very easy to set up. It's very flexible. Easy to control from the Samsung app. I'm quite impressed with it in terms of its flexibility and general, ease of use. That'll be up. That review will be up probably next week, actually. And then we got Q Acoustics. They've got their M4, so M5 Samsung multi-room speakers, M4 soundbar with Q Acoustics. Maybe these guys should come up with some different numbers. Mark's reviewing that at the moment. And then I've just today received our first LG TV, which is the LB730. Which we'll be reviewing. I'm reviewing that, and also, what was called WebOS and is now called, rather boringly, Smart Plus. I don't know why they've done that.
I think that was a mistake. I know why they've probably done that, because it was a failed operating system in the mobile world. But I think WebOS was quite nifty, and it stood
out. It was different, wasn't it? And WebOS is different from everybody else's.
I mean, Smart Plus sounds like everybody else's system.
Yeah, I know. I was amazed they did that. But anyway, they're now calling it Smart Plus, so we're getting our first chance to actually review that as well.
Okay, so that's the reviews coming up. We'll be back in a second with some games news.
I've got a review coming up, but I may as well not promise it, just in case something bad.
No, yeah, don't make any promises, Ed.
Mm-hmm. When you say coming up, do you mean in the next 2 weeks?
No, in the next week.
Oh, so great. So
that's the end of the month.
Oh, shut up! I'm doing my best.
Always under promise, and over deliver. That's you, isn't it?
Something like that. Although it's touch and go at times.
Right, so games news. Not a lot going on games-wise, is there, Mark?
Well, you've just had the biggest game show of the year, so, you know, in the kind of fallout from that, no, there's not a great deal coming out.
Okay, so E3 was last week. We had a mammoth games podcast, so go and listen to that. If you've got 2 hours of your life you don't want
2
back.
hours to spare.
It was fully interesting stuff, Mark. I listened to it this morning, and lots of games talk in there, which is what you want from an E3 show, seeing as it is a game show, and last year it was dominated by hardware.
Yeah. Last year, what was very much kind of hardware centric, and it was a little bit of a soap opera, simply because there was so much going on with regards Microsoft shooting themselves in the foot, and a lot of people kind of proclaiming Sony to be the saviors of gaming by somehow sticking with the status quo model of how to release consoles and games. This year was much more about just about the games. It was very, very even year in terms of kind of the big conferences. Even Nintendo got in on the act, even though they didn't have a conference. They had their little digital event. But it was very much a year where everyone kind of played to their fans.
Can I just ask you about Nintendo? Sorry to jump in there, but this is bugging me because I don't know how they presented this. Just explain what you mean by digital event, because I've seen this mentioned. What, you watch this on your browser or what?
Yeah. It was just a direct kind of feed. They do these things, Nintendo Direct. So it's basically, they put together their own little kind of presentation, and then, it's just a video that you watch over the internet. And given the fact that everyone, 99.9% of gamers will be watching, the conferences over the net, it makes sense if they're planning on kind of saving money and they don't have a great deal to show off. I mean, the Sony show was 2 hours long. The Microsoft one, I think, was about 90 minutes. Nintendo got theirs over in about 40, Yeah, but they could have cut some of that.
Is that because they've got nothing to say?
Yeah, they've not got anything to talk about, have they?
Well, it was a fantastic lesson in how to kind of almost just carry on regardless.
Tread water.
Yeah, well, they put on a brave face. It was a funny kind of presentation. They had these little kind of robot chicken animation sketches, and there were the Satoru Iwata and Reggie Fils-Aime were poking fun at themselves as well a little bit, but there is very much the sense that they're smiling to camera and they're saying everything's fine, when it probably isn't. But still, they had some new stuff to show off, and they played to their fans with, a footage of a new Zelda. I'm not entirely sure about the amiibos, the little toys that they're going to be selling, but still, again, it's trying something different.
So, Mark, are video games inherently sexist then?
Well, this was kind of one of the little stories that came out from the show, because there weren't that many proper stories, which was Assassin's Creed Unity is going to be offer 4-player co-op gameplay for the first time in the series, and you can't play as a female character. Now, I think this was kind of okay in general. Most people would say you can take an artistic decision on this kind of thing, until the technical director came out and said that it would have doubled the work to include a female character, and that was the problem. Given the fact that the Assassin's Creed games sell, kind of by the shipload, they make huge amounts of money, they've got absolutely massive teams working on them, you would think that, given the fact that most movement in games is based on a kind of fairly, sexless, androgynous model, that they could have put in female characters. But again, this is one of those things that's kind of been blown up.
I've got one word for you, Mark. Bosoms. I think that's where the problem lies.
Well, there's the argument that perhaps, games traditionally have male figures because they're, it's a male-dominated sphere, and certainly they're playing to their audience. But that kind of argument's been muddy simply because of the fact that you've got the rise of tablet gaming and mobile gaming, and so virtually every statistic these days that says, what the split is, what the gender divide is on gaming, tends to lean towards it being about 50-50. The problem is it then doesn't go into enough specific detail to say, but what are the type of games? If someone's playing, Angry Birds on their phone or something, if that's 70% female or something, then that skews things.
Well, there's an
there's
argument
other
that
things
certain activities are predicated to certain genders, and there's nothing that it doesn't matter how. There's nothing wrong with their inclusivity. They just appeal on different levels to different genders, you know. But video gaming is a funny one because I do think that it doesn't, you know, it's notable that we struggle to actually mention or talk about sort of strong female leads in games, and just ends up inevitably heading towards Lara Croft and her enormous pixelated tits.
Well, that's not strictly true, Ed, because of course Last of Us was one of the biggest games of last year, if not one of the biggest games ever, and that had a major female character in it.
No. I mean, slow progress is being made, but it's hardly a
And Lara
tidal
Croft's
wave,
bosoms
is it?
are a lot smaller these days, unfortunately.
Yes, if giant sort of polygon boobs are your thing, Steve, then that's your prerogative. But yeah, not the most convincing thing I've ever
I think
seen.
I said in the past that I fancied the caramel rabbit, cartoon rabbit one.
Well, wasn't the
your
low
own
point?
time is none of our business, Phil.
Wasn't the low point? I'm sure Mr. Botwright confirmed this. Didn't the Dead or Alive people admit that they had an entire rendering team for breasts?
I do believe there was a team assigned to jigglage.
You know,
I don't think anyone denies that, you know, if you're playing Battlefield 1942 or Call of Duty or Assassin's Creed, you're probably a guy because it is very much aimed at a male audience. I think it was a statement that animating women was harder than animating men that was strange.
Yeah, that was a little bit odd.
Human beings are human beings, aren't they? Ultimately, we all evolved from the same.
but what's the Nintendo the NES or SNES game where quite out of the blue it was revealed the protagonist is a woman?
Oh, you're
Normally-
thinking of Metroid.
That's
Super
the
Metroid.
Spoilers.
Again, I think you can have to handle that. I think the youngest Metroid is now 20 years old, probably more. So,
But that's a classic example of how gaming has traditionally kind of looked at female characters, which is they've just written a male character and just said, let's make her a woman. You know, they haven't. It's not been specifically written as such, and you know, you are talking about a medium that's very much in its infancy. I mean, if you're talking about in terms of depth, if you look at what was on show at E3 and kind of narrative arcs that they would offer, you're not, you know, there's not much in the way, you know, if you're interested in cinema and Schindler's List and that kind of thing, you know, you're not going to find much on show, particularly at a time when you're constantly changing generations of consoles. And so therefore the question is, how do you get out a product in the quickest possible time whilst developing for, you know, a completely new system? And traditionally that's just to make some kind of generic iteration, which is, you know, shouty, shooty military man. And that's usually a male kind of thing.
Yeah, those are the bits I like.
Right, okay. Talking about a bunch of tits, Games Podcast is also out this week, Mark.
Yes, it is. As you said, it was an epic. And there was stuff cut out from that. Bear in mind that.
God, how long did the recording session go on for?
Well, look, I mean, that was a serious record, and that was right after the shows, and I was up until about 6 a.m. doing the Sony piece, because their show didn't end till 4 a.m. previous day, and I just watched the Nintendo one and was writing that up when we started that Games Podcast. So if I'm babbling slightly more incoherently than normal, then I apologise.
You're just high on caffeine, are you?
is
Yes.
the director? We're going to get the director's cut. Games Podcast Redux.
Oh, I hope not, because I have to sit and check the thing.
Nice.
I'm just joking. Not.
Not. Now there's a throwback to the Metroid era.
Way.
Sure wing, Lara Croft.
Anyway, so if you want to know everything about E3 and what the guys thought and what excited them, what didn't excite them, and what could have been done better, go and listen to the Games Podcast. It is available now. You can go and download that after you finish listening to this, and we'll be back in a second with movie news. Okay, starting off movie news as we always do. What's at the cinema, Steve?
This week, Phil, it is Oculus, which is a horror film starring Karen Gillan, previously Amy Pond in Doctor Who.
She the
And
ginger.
I must say,
She the ginger one.
yes, the ginger one. That's correct.
She's nice.
So, she's quite cute. I tell you, if her career takes off in a big way, young girls, sort of like teenagers or like 10 to 12-year-olds with ginger hair are going to get more work experience because they have to hire somebody to play with it. Like in this film, for example, there's a younger actress playing her as a sort of 11, 12-year-old who obviously had to have ginger hair. And the same, I think, in Doctor Who, when they played a younger version of Amy Pond, although actually that was her cousin playing her younger version. Again, ginger hair. I noticed there's another TV show she's in now called Selfie, and there's another actress who's ginger hair who's playing a young version of her. So it could be good news for ginger-haired actresses if Karen Gillan gets more work. Anyway, this film was actually made last. It came out last year at a lot of festivals where it did very well. It didn't actually get released in the US until April, and it's only just opened up here. It's actually one of those films. It's really interesting. It's quite clever in the way that it's set up. It sets out its rules at the beginning. In fact, in a scene where she explains to her brother what she's trying to do, and it sticks to them. And that's always good enough. I like in a horror film. I like them to set out some ground rules and then stick with them. The basic premise of the plot is that a decade before, 11 years before the action taking place in the film, there was a tragedy in their family. Their father effectively went mad, killed the mother, tried to kill them, and the brother had to kill him in self-defense. He spent the next 10 years in a mental institution, and has just been released, having been deemed, well enough to return to society, which seems a bit harsh considering he was doing it in self-defense. But anyway, he immediately gets out of the institution, and then Karen Gillan takes him to their old house, their parents' house, which is still empty, but they still own, and has basically acquired, through various machinations, has acquired briefly this mirror that was hanging in their father's study when he went nuts. And she's convinced that the mirror is possessed and it caused him to go crazy. And she's got this whole plan about how she could prove that it's supernatural and that it was the mirror and not her father, and therefore exonerate him, plus exonerate her brother as well.
This all sounds legit so far, Steve. Keep going.
Yep. That's the setup. And then obviously it would be nice, unfortunately they kind of play the supernatural card pretty early into the film, like in the first 5 minutes. If they'd not done that, if they'd left it to the point where because the brother keeps trying to explain the events she's describing and the research she's been doing about the history of the mirror, which goes back something like 300 years. And he keeps trying to explain it all with rationalizations, and saying, well, this could have happened, that's just false memory, and you don't remember the way it really happened. Because obviously he's been convinced by the psychiatrist that, nothing supernatural happened, it was all just his dad went nuts. And if they'd let that play for longer that way, I think it would have been better because, the more you can explain something rationally, I think the more interesting it becomes. Is Karen Gillan just losing it because, she hasn't had any professional help for 11 years to deal with the trauma of her father's, murder and then trying to kill them, whereas he has. And I think if they'd done that for longer, it would have made it a more interesting film rather than going straight to supernatural.
Am I the only one that can see the obvious plot hole here?
What?
Smash the mirror?
Aha. No, there's loads about not smashing. Trust me, they have thought of some really... It's clever. I do like the way the film... I really enjoyed it, actually. It's got a very... the ending's a bit obvious, and it lets down slightly. But otherwise, it's quite well set up. They really do, as I say, lay their ground rules out and stick to them. And there's this whole sequence, and the film takes place now, if you like, but there's also lots of flashbacks to the events 11 years previously, and it cuts backwards and forwards between the two very cleverly. It's quite well structured. It's very well made. The acting in its accent, Karen Gillan, who does it, I've got to say, a very good American accent, is very good in it, as is the rest of the cast. There's Katie Sackhoff in it, who played Starbuck in Battlestar Galactica. She's playing the mother. Is not afraid to occasionally go quite nasty. There's a couple of scenes in it that not necessarily overly gory, but they sort of really do hit it sort of our innate fears of certain things, which was done very well. All in all, I thought it was an excellent film, except for perhaps the ending, which was a little bit of a letdown. But otherwise, I did really enjoy it. It is very clever. It does stick to its rules. It does play with the audience. There is a growing sense of paranoia. As I said, perhaps if they kept it less obviously supernatural for longer, it would have made it slightly more interesting. Because I think things like The Shining, or if you've seen it, The Orphanage, you can interpret those films as being just the guy's gone nuts, or the woman's gone nuts in the case of The Orphanage. And it doesn't have to be anything supernatural about it at all. But you can also accept that maybe there is something supernatural about it. And I think that ambiguity makes it more interesting. But overall, I think I gave it 7 out of 10. I thought it was it's quite scary in places too, as a horror film should be. So it's got some good scares, some interesting ideas. It's well executed. And I really enjoyed it. 7 out of 10.
Excellent. Okay, so let's move on swiftly to Blu-rays that are coming out next week. Simon, why don't you take us through them?
Okay. First one on the list is Her, which I saw the PR of this a couple of weeks back. It's pretty good pretty good disc. Looks good, sounds good. Peculiar film.
I thought it was a brilliant film.
Yeah,
I thought it was absolutely brilliant.
Just it's a strange concept. A man having a relationship with his operating system.
I don't think that's a strange concept at all. And I think that their sort of vision of the future, and it's a near future, is very prescient.
Yeah.
And I thought the way the relationship develops, it's just like a real relationship. I mean, it was in the end, Samantha could have been a person. She just outgrew their relationship. And that's I thought it was very, very clever.
It's something which is normally I would avoid this type of movie, but I'm really intrigued to see it. It's a Spike Jonze movie, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
Normally I don't really get along with his stuff, but I do want to see this because I think, like you alluded there, Steve, this could very well be our future. And things are moving so quickly with social networking, social media, and the way that mobile phones are used, new operating systems and so on. I mean, I was even in a car at the weekend that speaks to you. Things they're moving in that direction, so I'm quite interested to see it. I think
you were in an MG Maestro.
Yes, I was.
Oh, that's a blast from the past.
That had a talking dashboard. sorry, I'll go back into my stupor.
Anyway, so yeah, I'm quite interested in seeing this one.
Yeah, it's well worth seeing. It's very it is interesting. It is interesting. Next up, we got the 40th anniversary of Blazing Saddles. Sitting around eating
more
beans.
importantly, given that, let's face it, if you like that film, you already own it. Is there a compelling reason to buy the 40th anniversary version?
Probably not.
Well, they almost certainly the releases to tie it in with. You said 40th anniversary, plus also with A Million Ways to Die in the West coming out in the cinema, which they probably thought was going to be more successful than it was. They thought, we'll get it out again.
Yeah, I wonder if he gets a budget to do another movie, or if that's his movie.
No, they're already making Ted 2.
Oh, they really? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Which I'm sure will do very well.
I mean, how many more Flash Gordon jokes can you do though? That's the issue, isn't it?
Yeah, you're right. I can't find any details on what's actually on the disc.
Okay.
Yeah. But it's a great film. If you haven't
got it, get it. Yeah,
get it. It's it's even if it's just for that baked bean scene. Next up, we have Thunderbolt Lightfoot, which I thought was already out, but it's not. This is a UK release. I mean, it is out in the States, but it's first time here. Yeah. Another ancient film.
1974.
Yeah. Well, Christ.
Ancient. I was born in 74. You saying I'm ancient?
Yeah. That's it on the list. I think I'd just like to say there's.
I've forgotten one.
I know it's an exclusive. Is Deadwood is coming out as well. I think that's next week, isn't it? The complete series of Deadwood. I know it's exclusive to Zavvi, but that's definitely worth picking up that one.
Can I just say Thunderbolt Lightfoot was directed by Michael Cimino. It's his first film, and it stars Jeff Bridges and Clint Eastwood. And it's actually quite a good movie. And if you haven't seen it, worth checking out. I forgot to add to the list, coming out next week, Stalingrad, the Russian movie that was shot in IMAX 3D, which I'm quite interested in the Battle of Stalingrad for one thing, but also the idea of epic battle scenes in 3D is quite appealing. It is obviously in Russian, but yeah, that's coming next week, and I'm quite keen to see that.
So this is different from the German film of the same name.
Although bizarrely, it's got the same actor as in both films. Thomas Kretschmann, who was in the German.
He's almost immortal. He looks exactly the same as he did when he started acting. He has what my wife and I call Suggs syndrome, where basically he's looked the same for 30 years. It's I mean, I'd love to know his secret. It's really impressive. But I mean, I'll be interested in that one. But I mean, the German one. That's a magnificent film. And it features, to my mind, that has to be one of the bleakest endings in cinematic history. I mean, it's very accurate, but I mean, oh my God.
I haven't seen it. Is it worth checking out?
Oh, damn straight it is, yes. Very much so.
Oh, Thomas Kretschmann is in that film. He's also one of the Germans in this Russian-made version, which was, I think was the biggest budgeted Russian movie, well, not of all time, because obviously War and Peace cost like hundreds and hundreds of millions and used half the Red Army, so we don't count that one. But certainly it's the biggest budgeted 3D movie in Russia ever, and it was shot with IMAX cameras, so it's meant to look spectacular. I'm not quite sure if it's a particularly great movie in terms of its story, but certainly the 3D is meant to be very good. The battle scenes are epic, and yeah, I mean, Stalingrad as a story is interesting in itself, so I'm looking forward to that.
Can I just obviously beyond Blu-rays, we haven't managed to mention Netflix yet, so I'm going to do it now.
You said the N-word.
If you've got access to Netflix US, and I know some of you do, the Canadian cult movie Heavy Metal has been added to the film rotation. And if you haven't seen that, I mean, for example, if you've ever wanted to try salvia but have been afraid of the ramifications of taking a hallucinogenic drug, you just watch Heavy Metal. It's much the same. And it's also, you may know it better, it's the basis for the South Park episode Major Boobage from one of the more recent seasons. Don't get me wrong, it is in no way, shape or form a good film, but it's immensely entertaining to watch at least once, and it has got a magnificent soundtrack if you do like 80s hair metal, and every now and again, if I drink enough, I do. So do check that out if you've got the ways and means to do so.
I will. And since Ed's mentioned it, one of the films that opened this weekend is Devil's Knot, which is directed by Atta Magoyan, about the Memphis 3 murder case in the States about 20 years ago. That opened at cinema this weekend, but if you've got Netflix US, you can actually watch it now on Netflix US. So do that if you want.
So are you going to go and see Mrs. Brown's Boys next week then, Steve?
I would rather put a bullet through my head. I've seen the trailer, and if it can't look funny in the trailer, you got to wonder what the rest of it's going to be.
I think we should insist he goes. He managed to shirk the One Direction movie.
Yeah, I think you have to go because. And I'll let you in a little secret here. I actually quite like the sitcom, and I've been to see it live and thought it was absolutely fantastic. But the movie looks the movie looks naff as hell.
I would rather lick the floor of an abattoir than sit through that.
Can we arrange to do one of the two?
Yeah, we can arrange one of them. So to wrap up on this week's podcast, it's something that I posted to the front page this morning, and the last time of looking, he says, as he opens up his browser onto the front page, it's had something like 60 replies, and we thought it would get quite a bit of interest because it was Simon, Kaz and Steve who sat down and put this bit together. It's the 20 best Blu-rays for picture and sound. So Simon, explain the premise you were given for writing this.
What we thought we'd do, we've all got entertainment systems, home cinema systems that we all love to show off. That's one of the reasons why we kind of get into this thing. So you can put on a film and sit back and get that cinema quality and show it off to your mates. And since Blu-rays come along, there are some absolutely stunning quality discs that have got blistering picture and incredible sound, and when you put them together it makes for a fully immersive experience. And
I think we have to point out at this point, not necessarily a good film.
No, that's what I was just going to come on to say that. And the purpose of this particular list here is to demonstrate the quality of the disc itself in its terms of picture and sound. The film has got nothing to do with it in this particular list. Having said that, there are some pretty good films on this list, but so if you discard the feature itself and just look at the picture and the sound, we didn't even include the extras in this, it was just the picture and sound, and we sat down over a Sunday lunch, Kaz and I, and bashed out this list, which is now on the front page for all to see and for everyone to moan at.
Well, no, I don't think people are moaning. Whatever happens, Steve, it's a blokey thing. 97% of our readers are male. They're in the age group of 20s to their 60s. High disposable incomes, usually have nice systems, otherwise they wouldn't be on AVForums, would they? That's why they're there, to get advice and to buy equipment and all the rest of it and to show their systems off. But when it comes to lists, people will always have their favourites, and if you're picking the 20 best, you're going to leave things out like Saving Private Ryan and so on, which if you're picking 20, you've got to leave lots of them out. So what was the difficulties with putting this one together?
I think the point of these films in particular was that some of them have specific scenes that are great for either demoing your system or we use them in our reviews.
Absolutely.
So, for example, Kung Fu Panda. Not saying Kung Fu Panda is a great film, although it is good fun. But the Skadoosh bass note will give any any subwoofer are good seeing to. And so, you know, if you want to check, say you're reviewing a sub or an AVR, for example, that's a good scene to put on. In Oblivion, when the nuclear reactor, one of those nuclear devices blows up, again, I watched that film when I had that datasat system in last year, and I thought the house was going to fall down. There was so much base energy in that sequence. You know, in terms of shadow detail, and I know you've used this one, Phil, too. Sunshine.
Yeah.
That opening scene of Sunshine when the spaceship flies past the camera. It's got a lot of high contrast, bright white, you know, light from the sun, but lots of shadow detail within the metalwork of the spaceship. And again, it's a great test for shadow detail.
I've got to say, the one that I always use is not on the list.
Yeah, King Kong.
King Kong, it's not here.
But I think there's always a nature that we all have go-to films for subtly different reasons and for different sort of test purposes. I mean, I don't for a second believe it should be on the list, but one film I gravitate to time and time again for test work is Unstoppable, the Chris Pine, Denzel Washington train bonanza, because it's actually I mean, as you know, I don't do picture. It happened in the background and I squinted it blindly on my tiny television. But the soundtrack is a tremendously clever and quite interesting piece of layering. It's happening on a very distinct set of levels, and there's some very distinct challenges for speaker packages to handle with that. And it also is conveniently short and easy to navigate, and the scene and little things like the scene skip points and end points are in very useful points to get to test sections quickly and painlessly, which is also a considerable help. And I will say it's interesting because obviously Tron is on that list. Now Tron is a cracking Blu-ray. Picture-wise, I mean, I don't know a huge amount about that, but it certainly always looks impressive to me. I will say I don't think it has a huge amount of dynamic range. You know, in terms of the actual physical levels to which it goes, the highest to the lowest point. A lot of it is just recorded with everything turned up to 11 and redlined, and I find that there's an awful lot of, you know, it's to the stage where during the light cycle sequence there is clipping in that soundtrack.
Never seen it. Yeah, I'll put my hands up. I have not seen that one.
You're not really missing out in a film sense. It's pretty, and the Daft Punk score is magnificent. One of my favourite film soundtracks. But nonetheless, Tron for me has audible clipping in it. It's recorded. It's like a Metallica album. It's recorded as loud as it will possibly go, with very little in the way of actual
dynamic range.
Below that point.
Well, I did pick up that a few people complained that there was animated films in the list. But I'd have to say that my go-to disc for the best sound design I have ever heard in a movie is an animated film, and that's WALL-E. And it's also where picture and sound, and when you say that sound 50% of the experience, WALL-E is a perfect example of this, because for large parts of that movie there is no dialogue whatsoever.
Yeah, it's almost a silent movie for the first 20
exactly
minutes. It's all sound design.
Yeah, and it's all sound design, and it's properly brilliantly done, and it's all done from scratch as well, because none of the things exist really, apart from a couple of items that they could maybe have used. It's all made from scratch as well, and you've got to put your hands up and say that is astounding work. And especially the fact that you don't realise that for the majority of the film there's no dialogue. Yeah,
I mean, we should point out that there are two more lists coming, one about top 20 or 20 best 3D movies, and also sort of 50 best Blu-rays, more general list, basically. So obviously, rather than overlapping all the time, some things that haven't been mentioned here will get picked up on other lists. But certainly in terms of picture and sound, I can't really. I mean, Lawrence of Arabia, for example. I mean, that's taken from a 65mm source print in an 8K resolution restoration, then downrested to Blu-ray. But the picture quality on that is absolutely stunning. I mean, I think people often forget. People think, it has to be a modern film shot on digital cameras. No. Some of the best stuff you'll ever see. Stuff shot on 65mm. That is high resolution in 8K. So that's the source print, which has been taken care of and properly restored, is going to look absolutely incredible.
Yeah,
as the Lawrence of Arabia does. Yeah,
Lawrence are absolutely stunning. I still can't get over the quality of that. And another one which is forgotten quite a bit is Braveheart. That's got to be one of the best encodes I've seen of film to Blu-ray. It's astounding. I mean, the range in the image, the amount of shadow detail, and it's not a compressed mess either. It genuinely looks stunning, especially if you've got a scope screen. It just looks unbelievably good.
It is unfortunate at the end of the day still Braveheart. From the Professor Mel Gibson School of History.
Well, you know what they said at the time, don't you? That Mel Gibson, he'll be a terrible Scot. Well, look at him now, racist drunk. all the qualities of being a good Scotsman there.
I mean, of the more recent stuff that's on that list, I think Gravity. I think most people would agree that's become a de facto sort of demo disc for lots of people now, both in terms of 2D and 3D. It's got because of the nature of its sound design. If you're testing a surround system for its sort of the holosonic surround system and in its tonal balance of your speakers and how sounds are steered around the room. The sounds in that movie are, particularly things like voices and any other effects, are steered around the room to match where somebody is from the point of view of the protagonist. So it's got a very dynamic sound design with a lot of steering in it. So a good test for any system.
Yeah, kudos to Kaz and Simon here for the list, because there are some good ones in here that people normally forget, like Minority Report, usually overlooked. When it comes to these types of lists, good to see that in there, as well as the Aviator. I'd forgot how good that looks and how good it sounds as well. So nice to see them in there, Simon.
Thank you. Yep. We, as I said, we took a long while deciding on these lists. It was a collaborative effort, and there was a lot of backwards and forwards and inwards. And as I said, we did actually have to physically get together and discuss it, because it was just so much easier to argue which film we wanted on the list. And it was very much a debate on...
Yeah, it's much easier to have a fist fight.
Absolutely. Well, we did have our respective partners, and they would have pulled us apart.
No, Kaz, he's not worth it. Leave him alone. Mr. Botwright has been a bit quiet here. Let's pull him away from the football just for a second, just to get his thoughts on the list.
Well, obviously, it's missing Shogun Assassin.
No, actually, I wasn't going to say that. I was going to say that in terms of, if we're going down the Japanese route, missing Akira.
It's animation, so we've already got too much animation on there.
Yeah, I know. That's the only issue, isn't it?
I think there's a limitation to the resolution of. I mean, don't get me wrong; it's a magnificent film. I haven't seen a Blu-ray of it. Is it substantively better looking than
the soundtrack on it is staggering?
I don't doubt the soundtrack would improve considerably, because the soundtrack is mighty. But visually, is there much more you can do with Akira?
Visually, yeah, they've brought out a whole level of detail there. It really is a lot finer, and I thought the DVD was already decent enough. It's cleaned up spectacularly well, but they haven't completely destroyed it. They haven't taken away any of the grain structure there. It does look very nice.
I don't watch it that often. It just makes me cross every time I do that we don't have feet forward motorcycles.
I still have no idea what's going on in that film. I've seen it a few times, but the first time I ever saw it was at a screening, a rare, back before DVD, and even in the early days of VHS. It was screened at the Watershed Cinema in Bristol. This is in the late 80s, and I went to go and see it because it was everyone we talk about this. This great Japanese manga anime from Japan. I thought, let's go and check it out. My friends and I went along. It turned out at that same screening, and there's about probably 200 seats in that cinema, was also Edgar Wright and Simon Pegg.
Oh, is this another one of Steve's pub stories? Jesus.
No, they were there. The only reason I know they were there is they were talking about it and sat in one of the commentary tracks in space.
Yeah, okay. and who lives down the road from you this week?
Peter Gabriel.
Do you pop round and ask to borrow his sledgehammer?
Yeah, I borrowed it for that SVS review. How's that for bringing it back to the beginning?
Yes. So on that bombshell, that is it for the AVForums podcast this week. Don't forget, you can check out the 20 best Blu-rays for picture and sound on the front page. And by the time this podcast goes out, we will have the 3D article up. And will we have the 50 best ever Blu-rays up there as well?
No.
Okay.
Under promise and over deliver.
Latter end of the week, I think, that one.
Okay. So anyway, like I say, that's it for this week. Don't forget, you can ask your questions. Hashtag Ask the Idiots on Twitter at AVForums. You can also send us an email to podcast@avforums.com, or just put your question or your comments under this podcast in the podcast forums at AVForums. So all I need to do now is thank Steve Withers.
Shall I be forced to feed you, David?
Mark Botwright.
I will not be threatened by walking meatloaf.
Simon Crust.
Those sheep shit on my pack.
And Ed Selley.
If you put it in your mouth, then you'd be sure not to miss.
Don't forget, you can follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Bookmark avforums.com for the latest reviews, news and video. Plus, why not leave us a rating on iTunes? I'm Phil Hinton. Thanks very much for listening, and we'll catch you again next Wednesday.